Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, special coverage of this year's Defense News Conference. We bring you highlights from the yearly event, including remarks from members of Congress on the state of U.S. security. Pentagon leaders weigh in on the biggest challenges they face in the current defense climate. And we get an update from the Undersecretary of the Navy on efforts to modernize the force. Plus, we get the latest from the Pentagon's acquisitions chief. It was a jam-packed event this year, loaded with some of the U.S.'s most important voices. We'll bring you the highlights on this episode of Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. The annual Defense News Conference always draws big-name speakers and officials in military and defense spaces, and this year did not disappoint. Held recently just down the road from the Pentagon, this year's event featured senators, top Department of Defense officials, and experts on a range of topics. In this episode, we'll bring you the highlights of the 2022 conference, starting with one of the most influential members of Congress in defense and military spaces. As chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Jack Reed is at the nexus of annual DoD spending negotiations, and he presides over hearings with top Pentagon officials. Here's some of what he had to say at this year's event.
In this time of division within our politics and society, I am concerned by the increasing frequency of politically motivated attacks on our military. There is a long tradition within the American military of being apolitical, which is essential for our democracy and civilian control of the military. Yet, some have chosen to publicly disparage our military leaders for political purposes by generating a sense of outrage and indignation. While such attacks may serve a short-term political agenda, in the long run, it damages the national interest by eroding trust within the ranks, sowing doubt within our civil society, and benefiting our adversaries. These political excesses have grave implications, and they must end.
A lot of the four major categories you touched on in your speech are, of course, addressed in the National Defense Authorization Act. And I'm sure one of the questions on the top of everyone's minds right now is, when do you think the Senate will realistically be able to move the National Defense Authorization Act? Would that be before the midterm elections, especially when the appropriators haven't even agreed to a top line yet?
Yeah. We are pressing very hard. I'm personally engaged with Leader Schumer and others to try to get it to the floor before we recess for the elections. September, I hope. I'd like to say it's a certainty, but I cannot say that. There are other issues we have to pursue. We have to have a continuing resolution, obviously, to keep the government operating. And there are other issues that are coming before us that we have to take up. But we're pushing very, very hard to get on the floor in September. It would help extremely if we could work out a sense of timing with my Republican colleagues in terms of how long we have to be on the floor. But we're pushing hard. I can't guarantee it. I just tell you, I'm trying.
And another major provision in the NDAA would authorize $2.7 billion for additional munitions production. We've sent a large amount of our stockpiles of Stingers and Javelins to Ukraine, and a lot of the supply chain issues and workforce shortages that you touched on in your speech have hindered the defense industrial base's ability to replenish these stockpiles. So in addition to authorizing all this funding for munitions, what else needs to be done to increase munitions production?
Well, I think what we've discovered as a result of the last several years, the pandemic and then the battles in Ukraine, is that our industrial base, the defense industrial base, is not as robust as it should be. And we have to start beginning to develop, in conjunction with industry itself, a much more versatile and more resilient and more capable industrial base. We've tried some steps. With respect to submarine production, we were concerned several years ago that we might not be able to keep on pace with our submarine production. And so in the NDAA, we authorized funding up to about $150 million a year, specifically designed to help the submarine industrial base, to identify problems in production, to increase suppliers. And also, one of the areas was cybersecurity, which we found to be a difficult problem. I think we're going to have to take that model and extend it across the defense industrial base. In fact, I think Secretary LaPlante, who's coming later, pointed out that was one of the things he's discovered, surprisingly, anticipating the current issues with the supply base. And so that's one example of what we have to do. And I'm sure there's many, many more, but we're now in the process of beginning to not assume that we have the most, we have a industrial base that is capable of dealing with some of the issues we will in the future.
We've seen a lot of these items that Taiwan has ordered, like harpoons, for instance, where using presidential drawdown authority to get them into Ukraine, which is separate from the foreign military sales process, but obviously, the defense industry has to produce them. And the Biden administration recently put in a request for another $13.7 billion in Ukrainian aid. A large portion of that is military aid. They want that as part of the CR. This would be about $60 billion in support that the U.S. has provided to Ukraine so far. Has that level of support been adequate? And as this war goes on, how much more money do you think the U.S. will have to spend? And is there a sustained political will to keep passing all these supplementals, especially if the Congress goes to Republicans in the midterms?
Well, there must be a sustained political will, because this is not just an issue of Ukraine and Russia. This is an issue of freedom and the democratic values across the globe, particularly in Europe. Putin's plans don't stop at the Ukraine. He's made it very clear he wants to restore the Russian Empire, which would include free nations like Latvia, Estonia, and others, Lithuania. And so this is a battle, and that's what I think has galvanized the Europeans. This is a battle not just over some terrain that's disputed. This is a fundamental battle between Putin, an autocrat, and the free world, and we have to stay at the fight. I think this has brought us together. I see a great deal of cohesion on both sides with respect to Ukraine. The factor I think is going to be the most critical one is the will of not just the American people, but our European allies, particularly when we start facing things like diminished energy supplies. Europe is facing that right now. No one makes the connection, or few people make the connections between gasoline prices and freedom in the Ukraine. There is a connection, but I think they're more aggravated by the gasoline prices, and that's something we have to be realistic about. But we have to maintain this cohesion, and we have to maintain the support for the Ukrainian people. At this point, as I drive around my home state of Rhode Island, it's remarkable to see the number of Ukrainian flags that are flying. People identify with the Ukrainian people. They respect their courage and their valor, and they're committed. But over time, that commitment might start eroding, and that's what we have to be very careful about.
Coming up, we hear from the Pentagon's top acquisitions official.
The military and defense market is constantly evolving. Stay on top of the latest news with Sightline Media Group's live events. Continue to learn, understand new tools and technologies.
We're live. You're on in 3.
Defense, government, and industry leaders come together for successful and proven engaging events. You'll gain valuable insight, get the chance to ask questions, all from the comfort of your own home or office. Sign up for our events newsletters and receive alerts for upcoming live streams.
As the Pentagon's top official for acquisition and sustainment, Dr. William LaPlante is a critical decision maker in developing and maintaining the major weapon systems the military uses to fight. As the Pentagon considers acquisition of a range of complicated weapon systems and eyes a global struggle with Russia and China, LaPlante has a lot to consider. He spoke at the 2022 Defense News Conference about some of the most pressing topics on his agenda.
I wanted to start out talking about the state of the industrial base. We've done some reporting in recent weeks. Even though the worst of COVID seems to be behind us, the economic fallout's not. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine is causing some supply chain kinks. The defense industry's been struggling with labor shortages, supply chain issues, inflation, and they say that that's squeezing profits, but also making programs late, putting pressure on prices in the department. So I wanted to get your, as somebody who is in touch with industry regularly, do you think of these problems as distinct from one another? Are they intertwined? How severe would you say things are?
Yeah, so obviously we're starting on a high note here. No, I'm just kidding. I would just say, first of all, what you see in your everyday life in terms of, quote, supply chain and availability applies, of course, in the defense world, too. So it's no different. A couple things are going on. One is that, remember this, the workforce and industry, both not just the primes, but all the suppliers, worked through the pandemic. I mean, there's so many heroes in this country that have worked through the pandemic, figured out how to do classified work, figured out how to do hands-on work, welding, et cetera, all through the pandemic. We didn't skip a beat, which is amazing, because I don't know how many of you thought that this would be the case if you go back to March of 2020, number one. Number two is, just like everybody else, they're infected by the, whatever you call it, the great resignation, the quiet quitting, whatever terminology you want to use. I would say that, and I think this is probably true for non-defense, if you take the voluntary attrition of a company or a laboratory pre-pandemic and you compare it to today, it's typically double. So if you're at 7% voluntary attrition in 2019, you're probably at 14% right now. And what's the cause of it? Well, there's lots of causes. It's what we all read about every day. It's what we talk about. It's people deciding to make different choices on work-life balance. It's the economy. The economy is very, very hot, so there's a lot of good jobs. So just like everybody else, everybody's dealing with this, not just the defense industry. We're dealing with it. And related but distinct is inflation. If you're getting a 5% or 6% salary increase, which is a good salary increase 3 years ago in our world, and your inflation is 11%, and you come home and you tell your spouse, congratulations, I lost 5% buying power. It's not good. So all of those are relating together. Now, people aren't standing around and doing nothing about it. We are working on the workforce. In fact, it's interesting, NNSA, National Nuclear Security Administration, they actually gave a mid-year increase to all their employees. This is so there's a lot of those things going on, a lot of bonuses going on, but we need to do more to do that. So it affects all of us. But I think the bigger picture to think about is everything was kept going and on track through the pandemic. And if you look at what we're doing right now for Ukraine, it's incredible, it's remarkable, and how these factories are still producing everything through where we've been.
So there has been some speculation about when inventory shortages would start to affect aid packages, and there was some analysis recently that maybe this point had arrived. For instance, the one of the most recent packages switched to 155 millimeter howitzers, from 155 to 105, and went went to tow missiles because the Javelin inventory had fallen. Is that on target, or is I wanted to get you to clarify?
It's more nuanced than that. It's sure that people, we look at the inventory, and I think the chairman and the secretary very keen, looking at inventory and all that. But what's driving it more than inventory? I mean, yes, we're mindful of the inventory, but it's number one is production rates. But really, number two is what do the Ukrainians need and what can they use? And the second piece of it is, let's take 155s as an example. Every time you ask the question, almost every time you initially ask the question of what do we have of that munition, you get an answer. But then you look at it more, and you have teams go out, fly around the world, look in different storage places, and you find out the U.S. Army never throws anything away. It's like my aunt from the Depression.
Where would you put it?
Well, it's worse than that, or it's better than that, depending on your point of view. Without getting into specifics, we are discovering. Discovering is the wrong word, but we are learning more about available rounds of munitions that can be used in the conflict than you initially thought. And part of it is because we have a very high standard of what munitions that we consider in our stockpile. It's not that these other munitions aren't reliable, but they may be more for training, or they may be slightly older. The other piece we found on 155s, the U.S. isn't the only place that produces 155s. They're produced around the world. We were able to buy from sources around the world and get on contract within a week, and we just did this 2 weeks ago, 250,000 rounds of 155s. 250,000 rounds. Okay, we just bought them. And that was a quiet little announcement. So all these, the articles about, they're running out of 155s. We just bought 250,000. So we are being very creative. We are going around. Having said all that, we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to look at where the conflict is going. We have to look at the expenditure rates. We have to look at what's smart for us. So we have the near-term focus, which is going around scouring and figuring all these interesting ideas, but then we have the longer-term focus. I will also say there's incredible innovation going on. You may have heard about the harpoons or seen it in the news. Well, the story there is that a country, which I won't mention who it was, had some harpoons that were on a ship. They were naval-based harpoons. They said we could maybe do something with it, so we worked with that country and with the contractor. We got them off the ship, put them on some flatbed trucks, put the harpoons modules on the flatbed truck and a different flatbed truck for the power source, connected a cable between it, figured out it was exportable, brought the Ukrainians to train on it over Memorial Day weekend. In our country, it would be Memorial Day weekend. And the next week, 2 Russian ships were sunk with those harpoons. That happened in about 3 weeks. So there's incredible innovation going on right now, and we just don't talk about it enough.
And when we return, we'll have more from the 2022 Defense News Conference. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives her latest financial tips.
Let's face it, things are getting more expensive. Inflation is raising the prices on the things we buy daily. Depending on your situation, you might be considering an increase in your credit limit to help with expenses. But will it really help? There are both benefits and drawbacks to an increase in your credit limit. By increasing your card limit, you can lower your debt usage ratio, meaning how much credit you're using against your total available credit. Over time, this can help boost your credit score. That is, if you don't intend to use the credit cushion you've gained for yourself. And with a higher credit score, you'll be more attractive to lenders and qualify for lower interest rates on loans, which could help you financially. The flip side to a credit increase is when you use most or all of your newly available credit, which will quickly lower your credit score and make borrowing money more costly and harder to do. So if you're looking for a way to pad your budget with increased credit, be sure you've got a payoff plan that'll help in the near and long term. For help examining your options, talk to your bank or credit union. A good one will help you make the decision that in the end is best for you.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more coverage of military and defense issues, make sure to check out our headlines online at Army, Navy, Air Force, and MarineCorpsTimes.com and DefenseNews.com. And for fresh headlines in your inbox every weekday, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. Or if you prefer to get your news on social media, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And when we return, we have more from the Defense News Conference. With advancements in naval warfare moving rapidly in recent years, the at-sea force is always looking to keep an edge. With the 20-year effort to modernize its shipyards now underway, and the need to develop joint all-domain command and control capabilities, the force is under pressure to evolve. Undersecretary of the Navy Honorable Eric Raven was on hand at this year's event to talk about some of the biggest priorities on the force's horizon.
I wanted to ask you about the industrial base. I know we touched on the submarine industrial base a bit, but kind of in that same framework that you had, the short-term challenges versus the longer-term ones. In the short term, I wonder how the Navy Secretariat is looking at inflation, labor issues, supply chain issues. What is most immediately affecting the Navy right now, and is there anything much that you can do about it?
Well, let me say this. Labor has been a constraining factor in performance of the defense industrial base, and we are really interested in working with our industrial partners to start to address that. If I can just pull back the scope a little bit, just remember a couple of years ago, people were asking what had happened to manufacturing in the United States. And here we are in a situation where we have fantastic places to work, where if you want to apply skills in your trades, if you want to be trained to be an electrician, to be a welder, so many other trades, we need Americans to start stepping up and getting into this line of work, and there are really good opportunities to be had there. So comparing just a few years ago where people wondered where all these jobs are going, we're growing. The industrial base is looking for good Americans who want to get into this line of business. And let me tell you, in my short time as Undersecretary of the Navy, it's been really inspiring to visit some of our shipyards and see the dedication of the workers there, and how very often it's a family business passed down from generation to generation. So also at a time when Americans are worried about their future and their careers and things like that, I just urge anybody listening to this, see what the defense industrial base has to offer you, because there really are opportunities there.
Very good. In the next year or so, there are a handful of kind of bigger multi-year contracts that the Navy is going to have to be signing. There's a 5-year contract for destroyers. Shortly after that will be a 5-year contract for the submarines. Are you seeing, as those early negotiations take place, are you seeing where labor or inflation or anything is having a major disruption in those processes?
So first of all, let me say those arrangements with industry goes to that core of the stability of the program, and also getting the returns to the taxpayer, in that we can save substantial amount by locking in these purchases where it makes sense. Let me take ships, for example. In terms of inflation, we are starting to see some impacts. If you look at even the FY23 budget, there's numbers in there for cost to complete. That basically means where Congress has given us a certain amount of money to buy ships, and for a variety of reasons, whether it's supply chain, whether it's just the vicissitudes of the world, the cost has increased, and so we're starting to see some cost to complete impacts creeping into not only 23 but future years' budget, and we're going to deal with those. But it really speaks to the need to really partner with industry on two tracks. Again, making sure that where we can cooperate with industry and go hand in hand into important things like expanding the labor force, we want to be there. But also there's work for industry to be done. Industry takes on a lot of responsibility to manage its supply chain well, to perform on cost and on schedule as best as possible. And we also need to hold industry accountable for delivering what it's promised.
And that wraps up our special episode highlighting the 2022 Defense News Conference in Washington, D.C. Have a nice one, and we'll see you next week.